Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to express my gratitude for Mr. Gesmi for giving us the opportunity to be intellectually active by taking part in such insightful academic events. The topic of my presentation is problems with the demarcation of learners' errors. The bottom line of the discussion is going to revolve around three main questions. The first, what exactly is an error? This is a discussion of the epistemological limitations that we have when it comes to the capturing of the exact nature of errors. Second, what is the place of errors in second language acquisition? Now, this question is a discussion of the importance of errors in second language acquisition, both as a process and as a field of inquiry. Third, which I believe is very implicational in nature, should teachers police learners' errors, and if so, how? A very central element in the discussion of second language acquisition is production imperfections. It is widely observable that learners of a second language frequently demonstrate flawed language output. While flawed language production is not only inevitable but also necessary for language development, the sources thereof lead to a dichotomy between errors and mistakes. Contrary to the popular behavioristic belief that flawed language production is a negative aspect of language learning resulting from bad behavioral linguistic habits, and it is hence to be avoided, more recent trends in language teaching view learners' production, whether ideal or otherwise, of course, as markers of language development. They are hence used to model the process of evaluation and monitoring. In the context of first language acquisition, children make use of their innately built system of universal grammar principles, which are assigned parametric setup based on process of trial and error. Errors made on a regular basis help monitor the child's progress towards building an L1 gauged acceptable speech. By the same token, second language learners entertain a variety of feedback sources that are elicited by errors. Flawed production not only offers opportunities of progress by bringing corrective feedback, but also helps teachers identify the progress made at the level of learners' L2 knowledge. Identifying areas of apprehension, which is made possible only by systematic analysis of learners' flawed production, is the first remedial phase in promoting a more efficient language pedagogy and creating a more supportive learning environment. Flawed production, for want of a better term, can be consequential to a variety of factors, one being a lack of knowledge about the rules governing the target structure, and another being a multitude of extra-linguistic factors such as stress and fatigue. Linguists, particularly Corder in his seminal work in 1967 and subsequent works in 1971 and 74, offer an insightful categorization of flawed production on the basis of pattern recognition abilities, systematicity, frequency of occurrence, and total feedback. In view of that, some flawed productions are the outcome of a lack in pattern recognition abilities, that is, critical hindrance at the competence level. Here, learners produce erroneous linguistic structures that they do not know what the correct rule-governed alternative is. Such errors are observed to be systematic and more frequently occurring in learners' linguistic performance. Observably, given the lack of competence, such flawed productions are not self-corrected by the learners and require suitable corrective feedback. On the other end of the spectrum, other instances of flawed production stem not from a lack of linguistic competence, but rather from language exogenous factors such as memory lapses, stress, and fatigue. In these cases, learners do recognize language governing patterns, yet they fail to translate this knowledge to correct performance. Such instances of flawed production are reported to be of a lesser frequency and systematicity than the ones stemming from a lack in linguistic competence. Another observation is that learners, in the case of such flawed production, can demonstrate total feedback as they manage to self-regulate and self-correct their production whenever noticed. Such instances actually do not offer direct insight into learners' developmental stages due to the absence of a clear pattern of occurrence. The categorization of different types of performance flaws translates directly to different terms used to refer to each type. Stephen Pitt Corder refers to flawed production that is not systematic and solely the outcome of memory lapses, physical states such as tiredness, and psychological conditions such as strong emotion as mistakes. On the other hand, flawed production that is the outcome of incompetence at the level of underlying knowledge of language to date is referred to as errors. At this juncture, Chomsky's terminology can come in very handy in drawing distinction between errors and mistakes. It can be argued in line with David Crystal's discussion in 1992 that errors are flawed production that are associated with competence imperfections, while mistakes are flawed production that are present only at the level of learners' circumstantial performance glitches. In other words, mistakes are deviated language output that occurs in speakers' performance notwithstanding the pre-existing knowledge of the rules, whereas errors are a form of deviated linguistic behavior that result from the speaker's lack of knowledge about the structure's underlying rules. The discussion in the scholarly documents gives the impression that there is a clearly set boundary regarding the conceptualization of what an error and a mistake are. This semantic boundary is, however, very subtle, which causes some procedural complications. I argue that the identification of learners' errors on criteria of systematic frequency can be problematic, leading to an opaque depiction of learners' performance. Instead of discussing errors and mistakes as an either-or or binary opposition, researchers are better off discussing them as a more or less continuum, where more frequent corresponds to more serious. One major issue with the discussion of errors is that there seems to be an equivocal nature surrounding the term error. While some scholars such as Liskey, Pantanen, 1983, Chun, Day, Chenoweth, and Lopasco, 1982, view errors with reference to native-like performance, notwithstanding the variation therein. Other scholars such as James, 1998, consider norms of grammatical accuracy as directly indicative of errors, or the lack thereof. In the latter view, errors are a sign of ignorance about the structural makeup of the language, and the analysis of errors is in essence an analysis of ignorance about language and the way learners make do with what they know to approach structural patterns they ignore. When analyzing learners' linguistic performance, many researchers assess speech against norms of grammaticality. This method, however seemingly objective, can be problematic, given the fact that grammaticality is subject to variation on the basis of the variety chosen from the target language. Another very important point to make is that identifying errors can be subject to variation. Even errors that are related to grammatical well-formedness evaluation, which are relatively more readily identifiable than those related to stylistic choices evaluation, can be subject to judgment task variation even among native speakers. Such a claim is, of course, supported by empirical data. For example, the study of Hughes and Lascarato in 1982, where they presented a glossary containing 36 sentences to 30 individuals to perform grammaticality judgment tasks. The glossary contains only 4 correct sentences, and the remaining 32 sentences contain errors of variable degrees. Interestingly, the panel of individuals judging the grammaticality of the sentences consists of 10 non-native teachers of English, 10 native-speaking teachers of English, and 10 educated native speakers of English who are not teachers. Now, the study reports findings in favor of the unidentifiability of errors, inasmuch as one of the correct sentences was judged erroneous by 2 non-native teachers, 3 native-speaking teachers, and 5 native non-teachers. The second correct sentence, which was taken from Oxford Advanced Dictionary, was judged erroneous by 2 non-native teachers, 9 native-speaking teachers, and 9 non-teacher native speakers of English. What is even more interesting is that the non-native teachers outperformed both the native speakers who are not teachers and the native speakers who are teachers of English in the grammaticality judgment tasks. Another major issue with the grammar-based perspectives of errors is that learner language can involve elements that are well-formed yet semantically or pragmatically unacceptable. In such cases, acceptability serves as the major criterion for error detection. The examination of native speakers' use of language shows that certain structures, although grammatically well-formed, are not acceptable by the intuitive judgment of the competent speakers of that language. The example of reversible coordination, such as black and white, more and less, serves as an ideal example for the stylistic choices of native speakers, given the fact that white and black, or less and more, are grammatically well-formed, yet unacceptable by the speakers. It is noteworthy that acceptability judgment here involves stylistic rather than grammatical judgment. One conclusion that we can make from the study of Hughes and Lascarato is that defining errors on the basis of native speakers' intuition is not very accurate. Now, in the literature, we can find some definitions of errors which can be summarized in the view of Liskey and Pantanen in 1983, who make the claim that an error occurs when the speaker fails to follow the pattern or manner of speech of educated people in English-speaking countries today. Now, another definition by Chun in 1982 sees errors as the use of a linguistic item in a way which, according to fluent users of language, indicates faulty or incomplete learning. The two definitions rely on native speakers' performance and intuition as the norm of error identification, which is proven inaccurate by empirical evidence. This view of errors is further challenged by the study of definite and indefinite articles by Halfers in 1986, who reports statistically significant findings highlighting native speakers' inconsistency about the identification of errors. Furthermore, it is reported in the literature that some of the native speakers' intuition of errors is the outcome of some structures being less familiar rather than being erroneous. Errors that are attributable to inter alia semantic or collocational anomalies are not consequential to breaches of the rules of the code, as Corder says in 1971, but are rather the outcome of a stylistic judgment about what combinations in that variety of the target language are natural. It appears that an analysis of errors involves a combination of judgments about the structural well-formedness and the stylistic acceptability of the linguistic output. In this regard, I would like to share with you a definition made by Lennon in 1991, who defines errors as a linguistic form or combination of forms which, in the same context and under the same conditions of production, would, in all likelihood, not be produced by native speakers' counterpart. This perspective of errors implies that determining erroneous speech requires not only a reference of the grammatical rules, but also a sketching of the context of speech in such a way as to consider both grammatical well-formedness and the context and stylistic choices. Of course, the discussion of all conceptual, procedural, and implicational limitations that are associated with the demarcation of learners' errors cannot be summarized in a 10-minute presentation, but there are many other points that are going to be included in the research paper that's going to be shared with you after the conference. For now, I really appreciate your attention. Feel free to address any questions.